I will call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee. I'm the committee chair, Councilmember Reich. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmembers Yang, Glidden, Palmisano, Bender, and Gordon. We're a full complement, and we'll proceed with today's agenda. And it's a full agenda indeed. So we have 26 items, and we will go through all of them in order, starting with consent and then into the public hearings. This is sort of a product of the end of the year, and we have a lot of things to approve before the end of it. And we won't be meeting for some time because of the holidays. So starting with item 3 on the consent agenda, and any committee member can pull any item for further consideration. Item 3 is the 61st Street West, Lyndale Avenue South to Nicollet Avenue South Street Reconstruction Project designation. We also have the item 4, Hennepin Avenue South from Lake Street South to 36th Street Reconstruction Project and that designation. We have item 5 is the contract with Control Incorporated for control system programming for the Fridley Filtration Plant rehabilitation. We have a contract amendment with Chemstone Products Company for ready mix concrete. We'll increase that amount as we have more need for material. Item 7 is the contract amendment with Schaefer Contracting Company Incorporated for the 54th Street West reconstruction project. Item 8 is a contract amendment with Safety Signs for the rental of traffic control devices. Item 9 is the contract amendment with Tyzac Concrete for the 24th Street School Location Pedestrian Ramp and Signal Upgrades project. Item 10 is the contract amendment with Tyzac Concrete for the 35th, 36th Street Pedestrian Ramp and Signal Upgrades project. Item 11 is the contract amendment with Formation Studio for additional services associated with public art on Nicollet Mall. Item 12 is the memorandum of understanding with the MnDOT to access to traffic for access to traffic video. Item 13 is the 10th Avenue South Mississippi River Bridge Engineering Consultant Service Contract. Item 14 is the Penn Avenue North Reconstruction Project C-Line Bus Rapid Transit Improvements, and that's a cooperative agreement with Hennepin County. Item 15 is agreement with Hennepin County for traffic signal improvements. Item 16 is the 4th Street Reconstruction Project, 2nd Avenue North to 4th Avenue South, project layout and easements, and there will be a motion to that effect, I believe, from Councilmember Gordon. Item 17 is the 18th Avenue Northeast Trail Gap from 6th Street Northeast to Washington Street Northeast, project layout and easements. Item 18 is the Nicollet Mall policy, adopting a Nicollet Mall policy to assign unique regulations to various areas of the public right-of-way on Nicollet Mall. Item 19 is the Access Minneapolis Citywide Action Plan, amendment to include historic streets as a street design type. Item 20 is the Access Minneapolis Design Guidelines Update, receiving and filing that. Item 21 is the capital project closeouts and appropriations and revenue adjustments within the city's capital project and enterprise funds. Item 22 is the traffic zones, restrictions and controls quarterly reports. And item 23 is a bid for revised signal systems and pedestrian curb ramp improvements. Does anyone wish to pull any one of these items? Councilmember Gordon.
Pull item 16 for a staff direction.
Please do.
This is the 4th Street layout. There's been a bit of discussion and some back and forth about it. And I had some conversations, my office had conversations with Public Works. And this is, I just wanted to have us take another look at the so-called City Hall block. So the staff direction is as follows: directing Public Works staff to re-examine the layout of the block of 4th Street South between 3rd Avenue South and 4th Avenue South in light of additional input received on the proposed layout, and return to the first scheduled meeting in February with a proposed design. Now, maybe I'll just highlight one of the things I'm looking for and interested in is improving the pedestrian experience and still preserving some of the parking. Right now, there's this idea that it's peak parking only right along there at City Hall. I don't think that's enough for what we need for City Hall. And if it was parking was preserved, that would allow bump outs there. The only reason we wouldn't have bump outs is because we want to have more through traffic going. And hopefully that makes sense. I don't need to take a lot of time. I know we have a lot else on the meeting, but I'm happy to answer questions.
No, it actually makes sense, and I believe it's warranted. So thank you. So I will just take that as an adjustment or an amendment to how it's stated. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is now amended. And if there's any other discussion on any of the other items, see none, we'll approve all the items as submitted with the one adjustment per Councilmember Gordon's direction. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That carries. We'll now go into our public hearing section. starting with item 1, and that's the Broadway Street Northeast Stinson Boulevard to Industrial Boulevard Street Reconstruction Project Approval, Assessment, and Areaway Abandonment. Good morning, Director Hutchinson.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Adam Hayo, engineer with our Engineering and Design Division, will be presenting information on Broadway Street Northeast. Adam.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Adam Hayo. I'm a project engineer with the Transportation Engineering and Design Division of Public Works. Today, I'm here presenting for the public hearing for Broadway Street Northeast Reconstruction, City Project number 6759. The proposed project consists of reconstructing Broadway Street Northeast from Stinson Boulevard to Industrial Boulevard. Elements to be included as part of the proposed project include full removal of existing roadway, new sidewalks, along with a shared use trail, new pavement with new curb and gutter, and utility improvements. The project will also include planted boulevards with trees, 3 new signals, street lighting, new signage, and new pavement markings. The total project cost is $7.7 million. The total street reconstruction assessment for Broadway Street Northeast reconstruction is $2.6 million. This is based on the 2018 uniform assessment rates. The rest of the funding sources are $1.1 million in cash transfers, $3.4 million in a federal grant, and $585,000 in municipal state aid funds. And the rest are stormwater, and which is $150,000 in stormwater and $60,000 in water revenue. Staff has conducted numerous outreach activities throughout the planning and design of the project. There were 2 meetings held at the Mid-City Industrial Business Association. City Council approved the layout for Broadway Street project on December 9th in 2016. The detailed design is now complete. In advance of today's public hearing, staff hosted a pre-assessment meeting to provide an overview of the project, discuss plan improvements, and answer any questions related to the assessment method and process. This meeting was held on November 27th with 6 people attending. And finally, today Public Works is asking City Council to pass resolutions ordering the work to proceed, adopting the special assessments, authorizing the sale of assessment bonds, and authorizing abandonment and removal of areaways in conflict with the project. With that, I conclude my presentation. I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the staff presentation? Seeing none, we'll then open the public hearing. We do have people who signed up. I will take them in order, starting with someone who's from Harrison, Hanson, Wagensill. I'm sorry if I messed the name up. Please come forward.
I don't have any public comments. I'm representing Kamen Gearin LLC. We submitted a letter to the county clerk as of this morning objecting to the assessments. And our sort of reasoning is outlined in the letter.
Thank you for submitting those comments.
Thank you.
Go to Mary Mates or Matsy. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Mary Mates. I'm here from Landform Professional Services representing Costco Business Center. I had the opportunity last night to attend the informational meeting about this project. And we learned at this meeting that during construction, only local access to businesses will be allowed. Costco is anticipating opening their business in April 2018, and anticipated construction start is in May 2018. And while we understand that these improvements are necessary for the improvements to the street, and that assessments are set, our concern is related to the potential financial impacts related to site access throughout construction. So we are here today to make sure that access for Costco members and employees is maintained throughout construction, and that we are able to work with staff prior to construction to ensure that this happens. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I can stand for questions if you'd like.
No, thank you. And it's our practice to have those conversations, so take full advantage of the project team's time. Thank you. Called Dale Zorub. Sorry if I mispronounced.
Hi, I'm Dale Zorb from Broadway Business LLC. I own a 6-acre parcel on Broadway right in the middle of this project, and I'm here in opposition to the project. I feel like I've been blindsided by the speed at which this has happened. We have gotten no notice of this until a letter went out dated the 8th of this month that hit my desk a week ago. I attended a meeting last night, and there was not enough information to make a reasonable argument for proceeding with this project. The building owners along this parcel of industrial property, okay, are generally not in favor of doing this development. And the costs are excessive, and I believe it's an industrial area, so why would you plant boulevards and trees when you've got full-size semi-trucks going by? The leaves and the branches are just going to get knocked off by the semis. I think it's ill-conceived idea to turn an industrial area that services trucks and semis into some sort of a fairy tale boulevard, okay, with lots of greenery, walking paths, bike paths. There's a bike path there now, which has caused trouble for truckers, and that bike path is unused. So there is, I've got a company that operates out of that 6-acre parcel there, and my staff tells me they've not seen a biker on that bike path. So why now we're going to have an expanded 12-foot wide bike path and sidewalk on one side of the street, and then add another sidewalk on the other side of the street? It's completely unnecessary. There are no parks and there's no residences anywhere near this area. It's an industrial area that does not need such development. And the costs are just unbelievable. I operated a business there that made $108,000 profit last year. My assessment for this improvement is $200,000. That wipes out 2 years full of profits. And that's in addition to the $100,000 I already pay for taxes and stormwater fees. So I would ask that the committee table this and survey the existing owners that actually use Broadway Street to ask them which features that they want, because a lot of them are truckers. So if you have any questions, I'm certainly would love to answer them for you.
No, thank you for your comments. We'll have staff respond to all the different questions that arise in testimony.
Okay, thank you. So
Thank you.
about my objection, I'll send an objection in writing as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's the last for the sign-ins. Any additional sign-ins? Anyone wish to come forward and make comment? Anyone wish to make comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And if staff could maybe address some of the issues around communication. I know we do send out a certain protocol of communication. In addition, we have Mid-City Industrial is a recognized community group, obviously made up of businesses. Wonder what sort of engagement and feedback we got from them. If staff wanted to come forward. So process and assessments, and I will make some comment about the nature of that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As for the assessments, I understand the city has assessment policy and procedures, and with the reconstruction of Broadway Street, city staff is implementing those procedures, but however, the gentleman has the right to object. Mm-hmm. As for the kind of the purpose of the project, this corridor has a very large sidewalk gap. The project is intended to address this issue by providing pedestrian and bicycle access and safety, as well as the street segment is also part of our bicycle master plan as well. And in terms of process, we reached out to the Mid-City Industrial Association for their meetings. We sent out letters throughout the process to the along Broadway there. So we did kind of follow our normal notification process for meetings.
Well, and every now and then, sometimes communications gets missed on an individual basis, and perhaps we can have further conversation with the particular needs of both the gentlemen there, to the extent that they can be reconciled, although that's a more broader universal objection. And then the more specific access question, I think that's par for the course.
Yeah, I'll work with Costco's in terms of construction coordination and providing access during construction.
And just to note, the area, the community is called Mid-City Industrial, but it's a very mixed-use area. You have Class A buildings with, white-collar employment. You do have storage. You do have industrial, traditional maker industrial storage, a hotel. As a matter of fact, the employers are the ones that came to us some of the employers saying that they needed more access for their employers that are transit dependent or transit users, and also the few that do commute. do drop-offs and that sort of thing. So there is a pedestrian need that was identified. It might not be universally needed, but when you have several thousand employers or several employees with 7,000 employers that do say they need it, that gets into the communication process as well and the evaluation of the need. So I just wanted to make that comment for context for my colleagues who might not be familiar with the area. Any further conversation from the committee? Well, noting that there's follow-up as per usual with a project like this, I will move approval of this item. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting name, that carries. We now have item 2, which is the redesign of Nicollet Mall ordinance. Director.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Brett Jelly has been leading this effort on behalf of Public Works to revise the ordinance related to Nicollet Mall to match the redesign that has just completed. So Brett has a bit of information prior to the public hearing.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Brett Jelly. I'm the Director of Business Administration, Public Works Department. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to introduce and recommend approval of an ordinance update related to Nicollet Mall. Minnesota state statute allows cities to create pedestrian malls. In order to establish a pedestrian mall, a city must pass an ordinance with required elements that are listed in the state statute. Minneapolis passed the original Nicollet Mall ordinance in 1966 and added language for the extension in 1978. In coordination with the redesign of Nicollet Mall, Public Works worked with the city attorney's office to update the current ordinance. The update process included working closely with other city staff, including community planning, economic development, Minneapolis Police Department, to review the ordinance and then the associated policy, and also worked very closely with Nicollet Mall partners, including the Minneapolis Downtown Improvement District. We hosted a public meeting in September and presented a draft policy and ordinance for public review. The recommended new ordinance language does the following. It updates the existing Nicollet Mall ordinance and Nicollet Mall extension ordinance. It references a Nicollet Mall policy, which was on the consent agenda, that will guide activities within the pedestrian portion of the mall. And it limits access to the roadway portion of the mall to transit and non-motorized traffic while retaining special access permits, which are required by state statute. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions per the staff presentation? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Anyone sign in? No one signed in. Did anyone wish to come forward and make comment? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item 2 as presented. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting name, that carries. We can now go into the discussion part of our agenda, starting with item 24, Zero Waste Plan, Adoption and Development of a 3-year Implementation Plan. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Halston Sleets from the Mayor's Office is here to present information about this item. Halston has been supported by staff from Solid Waste and Recycling, Dave Herberholz and Kelly Kish. And in addition to that, Bob Craigs, our consultant on this, is also here. So we have a whole team, and Halston is going to kick this off for us now.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Again, my name is Halston Sleets, and I currently serve as Mayor Hodges' Senior Policy Aide for Environmental Justice and Sustainability. And I'm here to introduce Mr. Robert Craigs, who's been the consultant for the Minneapolis Zero Waste Plan. The draft plan was released on September 6, 2017, and the final plan is being brought to you today. Mr. Craigs represents Burns McDonnell and has been the principal consultant for this effort. And he also developed the city's commercial waste study that provided a great deal of information that assisted in the creation of this plan. Mr. Craigs leads the Solid Waste and Resource Recovery National Consulting Practice at Burns & McDonnell. He has worked in the environmental consulting field for more than 26 years in assisting local and state governments throughout North America, including such large communities such as Seattle, Denver, St. Louis, Dallas, and New York City. Mr. Craigs also served as a city council member and the mayor of the city of Lakeville for over a decade. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Robert Craigs.
Good morning. Thank you, Holston. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mr. Chair, council members, staff, and interested parties. I'll give you an overview of the zero waste plan, and I wanted to mention, as Holston outlined, that the full plan is on the city's website, on the Solid Waste and Recycling Division's website in detail. It also has a link to all of the stakeholder comments, and there was a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process that was included. So in terms of what I would like to cover this morning for approximately 10 or 15 minutes is to talk about the city's zero waste goal, give you some background in terms of the baseline program. In other words, what are the existing services that are being provided? Some of what we're calling the cross-sector strategies, or strategies that basically apply across all aspects of the city. Focus a little bit on the residential and commercial, industrial, and multifamily sector, which many of the strategies are outlined. Some of the other sectors to give you a sense of the scope of the plan, the planning process, and the next steps. Before I get started, I just want to mention that the team that was involved in putting this together met on a weekly basis, led by Halston and the staff, as well as representatives from some of the council members. And so it was a comprehensive process, certainly was a team effort, and I appreciate the opportunity to help facilitate the discussion. So the city's zero waste goal, which was passed in 2015 as reflected on the slide, is to recycle and compost 50% of its overall waste stream by 2020, 80% by 2030, and achieve a 0% growth rate in the total waste stream from 2010 levels. The concept of zero waste within the industry, there's a lot of discussion of what it means. It typically means different things to different communities. The city of Minneapolis has defined it in this manner, and I think what's important to point out is the solid waste management hierarchy, as shown on the slide, talks about the priorities in terms of the types of methods to use to reduce the waste. As pointed out in the zero waste goal, both recycling and composting are critical. It should also be noted that energy recovery of the residuals after recycling and composting takes place, those materials go to basically HERC. That is not the preferred method as outlined here in terms of meeting the zero waste goal. It's reduction, reuse, recycling, and organics recovery. So what is the baseline program? Again, the baseline program, and as outlined here in this slide, there's a number of facilities in which the city uses, whether it's for collecting, transporting, processing, or disposing of the waste. The baseline program can be characterized really in two parts. First, you have residential services. The residential services are provided by the Solid Waste and Recycling Department through a combination of municipal crews, as well as a consortium of private haulers. The breadth of services that are provided, and I think if you get a chance to look at the plan, you'll see it's very comprehensive. It's a high-performing program offering refuse, recycling, organic yard waste, and bulky items collection. Not all cities offer that breadth of service and offer that type of customer service. The city then bills customers within the residential sector, and some, as pointed out here, a small number of businesses, city facilities, for those types of services. The other types of services are what we're calling the commercial, industrial, and multifamily sector. Those services are provided through an open competitive system, which basically that means commercial license haulers provide those services to those customers, and they have contracts directly with those customers for those services. As I mentioned, the map outlines the city's commitment to work within the existing region to basically take those materials that are collected and have them managed. So the plan identifies a number of strategies. If you've looked at the plan, there's a number of tables. We have a number of different sectors, as I have outlined. Strategies are unique to each of those sectors. What this particular slide outlines is a set of strategies that are cross-sector strategies that apply across the board. It reflects a combination of needs, as well as a number of different types of sectors and their particular unique aspects. As you can see here, we have conduct waste characterization studies. That addresses the need to have a baseline. If you're going to measure progress towards the goal, you need to have a baseline for each of the sectors. encourage waste reduction, and promote reuse. As I mentioned on the solid waste management hierarchy, those two particular methods are at the top, and so it's critical that those are applied across the board, and you'll see in the plan that we talk about that extensively. That needs to be supported by additional resources for education and outreach in our stakeholder meetings, as well as within the steering committee work that's been done. We've emphasized the importance of that. We've gotten feedback from the community on the importance of recognizing the diverse community, both in terms of residents and businesses, and how that needs to be closely tailored going forward. The city's present program, again, is a high-performing program, and Kelly Kish and David Herbalholtz work hard to ensure that the number of different constituencies that are affected here are basically accommodated in terms of their various outreach needs. We also want to clarify which city department is responsible for the strategy, because there's a number of strategies. We have the solid waste and recycling department, but there's also ordinances on the books that address responsibilities, for example, for the fire marshal's office, for the city's engineer's office. So going forward, there needs to be some coordination. And last but not least, establishing a sustainable program funding source, so consequently, all the strategies can be implemented in a timely way. So what about the residential sector? I talked about how it's a high-performing service that's being offered by the city, and we've divided basically the various sectors. This is one that we feel that the city can build upon, and specifically, as suggested here, these are some of the strategies for the city to consider. Restructuring residential rates and cart capacities, communities that are able to divert significant amount of materials and make progress towards zero waste have what's called pay-as-you-throw programs, whereby it's similar to other types of utilities, so you pay for the extent of the service that you're using. What that translates into is there's a differential between what you pay for a larger cart for disposal of refuse as opposed to a smaller cart. The city presently has a small differential. What we're recommending is some analysis to determine if a larger difference will be helpful. It's also important to understand that many programs that are implemented with this pay-as-you-throw program also acknowledge the need to have discounts for certain types of customers. Cart capacities, bigger recycling bin, you'll probably recycle more. Smaller refuse cart, you'll probably put less in your refuse container. Secondly, adjust collection frequencies. Believe it or not, some communities have every other week collection of refuse because they have residents that are recycling substantial quantities. That may be an option. Expanding collection and drop-off options. There's a voucher program that's used and available for residents. Expanding collection options there. And last but not least, evaluate methods to increase specifically diversion of specific recyclable materials, as well as organics. In this particular industry, organics diversion is definitely something that a lot of focus is being put on in all sectors as it relates to solid waste management and diversion. I mentioned the commercial, industrial, and multifamily sector. This includes basically a number of unique aspects of the solid waste system, different types of waste than the residential system, different types of collection containers in many instances, and collection vehicles. So an acknowledgement of those differences is important. I also talked about how this particular sector is served by an open competitive system, so it has unique challenges and unique opportunities. From our perspective, it's very important as the team to recommend that one of the options to be considered is an ad hoc work group. An ad hoc work group would be basically a group of representatives from various facets of the community, including the hauler community, the business community, multifamily association, as well as other types of constituencies. The purpose of that group would be to collaborate with the city in terms of identifying a baseline, looking at strategies, and managing progress. One other option for consideration is targeted outreach and assistance. Again, this aligns with what I've talked about before in terms of the cross-sector strategies. I also mentioned the city has some ordinances in place as it relates to promoting recycling within multifamily and businesses. This is to enhance enforcement of those ordinances and provide some coordination. Many communities that are able to basically have significant progress in this area also require some sort of planning take place by individual generators. So mandatory generator waste reduction and diversion plans is another option for consideration. One of the unique aspects of multifamily buildings is trying to find space in which to have containers for recycling, for refuse collection, for organics. So one option would be to revise the building design requirements and support that change at the state level, whereby there may be some better options for multifamily buildings. And then last but not least, and similar to the residential sector, evaluating methods to increase diversion of specific materials. As I mentioned, this has a unique waste stream, these types of generators, as well as organics. And again, in this particular sector, one of the largest opportunities is to work with large generators of organics and try to promote diversion through a number of these different options. Before I move on, I just need to point out that this particular sector, because of the way the services are provided, some of the challenges are the lack of information and data, being able to develop a baseline, understanding quantities that are collected and recycled, as well as understanding the scope of the services. There's no specific requirements presently for haulers who are providing these services to this sector to basically provide that information. So some of these strategies address that information specifically. To get to the next level, as this slide points out, what's critical is to partner with the haulers, especially in the context of commercial, industrial, and multifamily. This particular slide and the plan itself outlines looking at communities with higher diversion levels and how they've implemented potentially one of these three. The first is expand hauler licensing and establish minimum service standards. You heard me say the haulers specifically are not obligated to provide data. What some communities do is in their licensing requirements, they would require data to be submitted in terms of not necessarily proprietary information, but information in terms of how much you're collecting, where are the materials going, how much is being recycled, as well as establishing minimum service standards so you can maximize the diversion. Another approach is to set up non-exclusive franchises. I know the cities address franchises in other contexts. I'll translate this into, and it outlines it in the plan. It's basically establishing a contract between the hauler and the city. It's called a non-exclusive franchise because it doesn't preclude the haulers from providing services to the array of customers that they're offering it to, but it's a mechanism in which to provide some accountability, both in terms of what's being collected, as well as the scope of diversion, as well as an opportunity to generate a sustainable funding source. And last but not least, your neighbor, St. Paul, has been involved in the last couple of years in the concept of organized collection. So Minnesota Organized Collection Statute basically has a prescribed process if the city would want to organize collection. And what that essentially means is contracting with each of the haulers to preserve similar market shares, to have some guaranteed minimum service levels, and to address the rates. The Minnesota Organized Collection Statute does not preclude the city from doing that on the commercial sector. Again, I'll just emphasize these are three options. They're outlined in the plan, and communities that are reaching high diversion levels have implemented one of these types of approaches. The other sectors, as I mentioned, just to ensure that we've provided you with the impression that we've covered the array of solid waste management sectors. As you can see in the diagram, we've talked about residential, commercial, industrial, and multifamily. We also have institutional, which it's a unique set of waste generators, public and private, can be schools, hospitals, non-city government. The city has limited authority as it relates to specifically addressing their particular challenges. So we have a section that addresses institutional sector. City operations, that's just walking the talk. It's very critical for the city to continue to do what it's presently doing in terms of implementing its own programs. And public space, which the city of Minneapolis and the basically lifestyle that we lead here, and the importance of public space, such as parks, Viking Stadium, Farmers Market, all of those are addressed specifically, and to the staff's credit, we have a separate section that we've identified specifically to both talk about what's presently being done and how to expand upon that. And last but not least, construction and demolition. That's basically construction, renovation, and demolition of buildings. That really addresses all the different sectors, so we have a separate section for that in the plan. So to close, I wanted to do two things. One, I'd just like to outline for you the planning process. And again, I think I've had a chance to talk to some of you as well as some of your aides. So I think you're familiar with this, but we just wanted to revisit the process to convey a couple of different things. This slide gives you a timeline. Back in 2014, there was a Zero Waste Summit at the Walker Methodist Church. Then, as I pointed out, there was a zero waste goal that was passed by the City Council in 2015. Halston, in her introduction, talked about the commercial waste collection study, which in essence was a prerequisite to the zero waste plan because it talks about some of the challenges in the commercial, industrial, and multifamily sector. That was commissioned in 2016. The city then partnered with the Environmental Initiative to have some stakeholder meetings in the fall of 2016 around these issues. And then in the spring of 2017, there were some more community stakeholder meetings that addressed the commercial waste collection study once the draft plan was done, and then it was submitted to the council. This summer, the draft of the zero waste plan was commissioned, and following the draft plan in the months of September and October, there were 7 community stakeholder meetings that were held. It included a range of participants, as I mentioned, as well as a range of locations within the city. Page 8 of the plan lists the dates and the locations of those meetings, as well as it provides the link to all the comments received. And so you can get a sense of the importance of stakeholder engagement in developing the plan. I also wanted to point out that on the website, we've actually taken the draft plan. We've redlined all the changes that we made since the draft plan was submitted and when we finalized the plan, so you're able to see that information. In summary, program access plus education and understanding equals waste diversion, as the diagram reflects. And so the next steps in terms of the process, it's important to take the number of strategies that are in the plan and prioritize them. The plan itself applies a number of different types of criteria, increasing diversion potential, difficulty of implementation, and ongoing cost to the city. If you've looked at the plan, you'll see that at the end of each section, the team has applied those criteria to the various strategies to give you a sense of where the greatest benefits would be and some of the challenges might be. Then develop detailed implementation plans as the diagram outlines. That would be done with additional stakeholder feedback. We want to make that clear that the plan, the implementation plans, once the strategies are prioritized, there would be some additional stakeholder feedback depending on the sector that those strategies apply to. If the council and the committee determines that it makes sense to recommend using the ad hoc working group and creating that group can act as a sounding board to collaborate with the city. Some of the challenges I mentioned is to gather the data and measure progress. And at minimum, the staff will provide an update every 3 years in terms of the progress that would be made. And lastly, and I think it does mention it here on your agenda, is that the staff is proposing a commitment to come back in 2018 with priority strategies and accompanying implementation plans for your consideration, so the council and the city can move forward. So overall, the zero waste plan serves as a roadmap for achieving the city's zero waste goal as outlined in the plan itself and as passed by the City Council in 2015. Thank you, and I can try to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Gordon? Oh, no. Okay. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Craigs, with regards to this ad hoc work group, I mean, is it just a strategy at this point that we should consider, or is it something that we should be doing?
Well, it is a strategy that's listed in the plan, and it's one of a number of strategies. If you look at the draft plan compared to the final plan incorporates the ad hoc working group, and that's as a direct result of some of the additional community engagement.
Okay, and with regards to this ad hoc work group, if it happens, I mean, what's the timeline between, let's say, now and when we have to implement something for the business multifamily side of hauling? Is it within the next 3 years, or is it just within the next year?
David, do you want to address that?
Chairman, committee members, the ad hoc committee, should we move forward with that, I think would be developed early next year. And with that being said, be useful in the development of the implementation plan that would then take place for the next following 3 years.
Okay. And can I just ask for the for the benefit of the public? I mean, at this point, our residential hauling is different from our business or multifamily hauling. Can you just kind of explain really briefly what the difference is between the two?
Sure. Chair, committee member Yang, the residential sector, so it's controlled by the city. So we have our own collection crews, and we have a contract with a consortium of haulers, primarily done with carted service at the curb or alley line. Businesses differ in that they have the ability to contract on their own for a private hauler and use multiple methods of collection, whether it be the traditional dumpsters or roll-offs at a frequency that is called upon by the needs of the business. So it could be, weekly, multiple times a week. Restaurants, even higher frequency.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I can just make a comment, I think that this change is a pretty big change, and I think it's important to get the stakeholders that are involved to be a part of, making the changes, just because it's a huge change. And so, I appreciate the work that Mr. Craggs and you, Mr. Herbert Holtz, and everybody has done, with regards to this. But I mean, to look at a change like this, I think it might be worthwhile to include the folks that are going to be most impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. And I, my reading into this is that the ad hoc group would be an essential part of how we move forward. What we see before us are different considerations. We've done a lot of due diligence to get to this point, to have a framework to move forward. Everything here is to tee up implementation, and any sort of direction that we take based on, again, the due diligence and the work that is before us should be based on an end result. The means we should be neutral to. The data, the insights, the different sort of knowledge that we glean should guide us to an outcome that is a performance-based outcome. And I think that's what we want. It's a zero waste plan. It's not a this strategy or that strategy plan. And so I appreciate how it's been teed up and framed. And of course, there's much more work to be done when we get to implementation. And the ultimate implementation itself will be its own process based on the conclusions from our following steps. And then in terms of ad hoc, I would assume that that is different than just stakeholder sounding board. That's something that could be an integral part of getting real world on the ground data, operational data, professional management insights that would not otherwise be a part and parcel of how we develop an implementation plan, and then also sort of industry insights and data sets that are technical that we would want to have as we move forward to something that policymakers would respond to. So it would be integral, data driven, and certainly in the spirit of partnership. So thanks for calling that out, Councilmember Yang. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I actually really appreciate that this is coming to us, since this has been a kind of a long road in coming. And I think it's good for this council to be able to see it, although I do think it's actually the next time this comes forward that will be the most significant, because that right now we have a big plan with a lot of variety and some different options that need to be evaluated. And the next time the 2018 council meets, those will be the critical decisions, because it's deciding on strategy, what policy options make the most sense, and all those different kinds of things. So I just wanted to call that out. I do think this is a very important initiative kind of overall, so I'm glad as well to see this structure that allows us to make those critical decisions and really kind of see what's there. I wanted to call out a couple things that I didn't see, and I'm hoping that to maybe think about how this could be incorporated in the work moving forward. I'm glad Councilmember Yang talked about the stakeholder, I forget what word you exactly use, but anyway, continuing to engage the stakeholders and being just careful about that process. I think that's really critical, kind of how that moves forward. The thing that I wish I saw kind of more directly in this plan is we have done a lot of work kind of overall in the city, talking about how race equity plays a role in our work. And I would have liked to see how a race equity lens was applied to this work. I still think that could happen. I think that could happen as a formal part of the plan, both to evaluate existing services and then to evaluate impacts of proposed policy and program changes. I do see there are some indirect references to this, including page 3 talked about some additional targeted stakeholder input that you want to gather from kind of a more targeted specific cultural communities. But what I am talking about is a bigger framework piece. And I do think it's important to include that in this because it's a major piece of policy. The second thing I had a question about is, you know, as decisions are made, there may be impacts on business opportunities. As an example, kind of this area of the construction and demolition, you know, this is an area where there is just, you're starting to see more companies kind of develop their expertise and how that works. And I could see that as an example being a business opportunity. And so anyway, I just call that out because it kind of struck there may be other things within this plan. So I am curious how the work happening here also coordinates with other sectors of the city that are more familiar with business opportunity and business development, just so that we're kind of connecting the dots. And I say that again because talking about business opportunity and growth is I think, an important goal for the city. This is actually another big part of the city's work on supplier diversity and kind of other things. And so I just wanted to call that out because as we put more effort into things like the structure around construction and demolition debris, that might create some opportunity. So, all right.
Thank you for those comments. And yeah, I think highlighting how we get other bottom lines out of this policy-wise, it shouldn't be taken for granted that we have the diversity lens and the equity lens. It should be called out broadly. And then, of course, we always appreciate the specific references, and we know that's part of a bigger insight, but maybe have that called out somewhere in the language of the document. And then also just the other opportunities, as Council Vice President Glidden has outlined, in terms of you know, supply diversity, business opportunities, but also workforce development and other sort of equity things through our nonprofit partners who are now engaging in recycling and deconstruction. That there are opportunities there that we want to be able to acknowledge, but also measure and sort of appreciate those advantages, which might not come out in a sort of abstract, raw cost-benefit analysis. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all the work that went into this. I guess I just have one question, and then maybe a few comments. The goal is to reduce or to recycle and compost, as well as hopefully reduce and never get in the stream 50% of our overall waste stream. Do we know what our overall waste stream is right now in terms of tons or any measurement whatsoever that's coming out of the city?
Mr. Chair, Council Member. So in the plan itself, we talked about one of the strategies was to do waste characterization studies. So the purpose of that strategy is not only to look at the waste types, but also to formally develop a baseline and have a better sense of what that baseline is. So
the short answer is? We do not. We do not. Do we know how much waste we're generating from our low-density residential sources?
And so Dave can speak to that, but on the residential side, again, if you look at, and I say we do not because we don't have all of the sectors, but on the residential side, there's an understanding of that, but it's the rest of the sectors that we do not.
So we don't have any idea how much construction waste we're dealing with? Or no hard number? Or how about from commercial or industrial?
We do not.
How about from the multifamily sector?
No.
Okay, so basically, we don't even know what our, I think that's a significant point to recognize, and I'll just note for my colleagues, that's something that I was interested in seeking, I think the first year I got here. And I met with the waste haulers and other individuals, and especially the MRFs, and I wanted to understand better. And so I think it's really important that we move quickly in understanding what our baseline is, because we'll have no hope of seeing any progress or how to make progress. For all we know, maybe some of these sectors are already recycling and composting 50% of their waste. But the problem is, I think a lot of this information is just kept in a black box somewhere. Do we know what average businesses are paying for their hauling, like on Lake Street, the small immigrant business? What does it cost them to get their waste taken care of?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Gordon, we do not. We know that there's varying rate structures throughout the city, and it's all dependent on, I guess, timing, frequency of collection, size of collection containers. We do have a very good handle on our residential waste stream and what we collect. We've got a very good database. We know right now we're upwards of over 37% recycling and compost. So even in that sector or that area, we've got a ways to go to get to the 50%. And we know that there are many businesses that are doing good recycling out there. We just haven't been provided the information. But one I guess, note of encouragement is that when we did have the stakeholder meetings and haulers and businesses were represented there, they did acknowledge that there was the need to find, get this data and a willingness to be involved in that process.
So we have some of the major stakeholders that are willing to come and participate in a work group and share information openly and work in partnership?
We are, and that's what the ad hoc committee came about with their input there.
Well, I'm going to take that as one of the most hopeful outcomes, I guess, that we finally have some people coming to the table. They're saying they're committed to working with us and seeing if they can't do something about the incredible waste problem that we have here in our city. So I appreciate that. I also just want to acknowledge the great work from the mayor's office and also the steering committee and colleagues up here. It's wonderful that we're getting this before us before the end of the year, I think, which was a goal that we set for ourselves, and we certainly did a lot of community engagement and discussion. This is kind of maybe the easier part, though. This is the policy framework, the general ideas, the goals, without actually putting money to it, without actually implementing the hard plans, but we're setting ourselves up, I think, to really hit the ground running, hopefully with the next term.
Thank you. And yeah, absolutely, the data thing is the thing at this point in time. And there's just no scenario in which I can imagine where we're not going to have a solid data set to move forward. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to just take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that's gone into making this plan a reality from many of you here in this room the past couple of years. I mean, this started in 2014, where we set a course to be really ambitious and create a policy that was comprehensive, that was about our whole city, and was about a lot of pieces and parts that we didn't know yet and we didn't manage yet. So the plan before us today is really more of a playbook. That's what Ms. Kelly-Kish would say, and I think that's a really appropriate analogy, because it's not saying we're going to implement every strategy in this playbook. We know what the goal is. We know that waste reduction is the goal, and these are some really thoroughly examined options that we think all could work for our city. And also just to thank, one of the real heavy lifters here the past couple of years has been Councilmember Gordon and his office, and I want to thank his staff and also my staff, Patty Day, who has never once lost her focus on this, even at times that I had to be distracted and move toward other things and come back to it. So I just want to say this zero waste plan addresses many of the issues and concerns that I hear about from city residents around climate change. it should be noted that the waste we manage today and the way that we manage it, we have a premier operation for what we have our arms around. And the rest we don't know. We don't know that we know that there is recycling operations out there. We know there are compost operations, but this is about taking that step to coordination, and food waste, construction and demolition debris, the organics program, and equity are really important topics on this to a lot of the city residents that we spoke about. I've had many important conversations around the city about the strategies outlined here. I'm confident this plan captures these ideas and turns them into the steps that we can take as a council in the coming years. A couple of them that don't quite fit into a summary presentation, but that I'm most excited about, involve addressing the issue of food waste and spoilage in our city, and how we could divert food from spoilage to use a little bit better. And this urban environment gives us an opportunity to do that. We've also imported strategies on illegal waste prevention that will help to mediate the disproportionate effects that we've heard from our Northside residents that have given input into this plan. We also, are going to determine how and where it will help us to allocate those future resources and energy where they're going to make the greatest impact. I see the people in the audience here today that we are going to need as our partners. We have a lot of downtown business people here, and they've been involved in some of the conversations, the stakeholder engagement strategy. They've been involved in some of these conversations on logistics. I'm hopeful that this partnership is going to have the momentum of an initiative taken on a few years ago about the commercial building energy benchmarking. It was maybe a little bit of a rocky start, but you've ended up in a really good place, and we've had a lot to show environmentally from our city. So I think that working with partners like BOMA, with other private partners across our city, we're going to have a more consistent experience, no matter if you live in a single family home or if you live in a multifamily unit downtown, or if you're a visitor to our city, from the moment that you might step out of an airplane to the moment you're out on Nicollet Mall. So I think that information and data sharing are really key, but I see their presence today as a sign of really showing up to the table of collaboration and their engagement in the work ahead. So I think the strategies laid out here are going to guide us as we work to make Minneapolis a better leader in environmental policy, and I look forward to the work that comes from this plan. So I see this as the next goal post. I want to thank everyone for their effort, and with that, I'd like to move the adoption and development of an implementation plan by both adopting the zero waste plan and then directing solid waste and recycling staff to coordinate an implementation plan by mid next year.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I would just make comment and take as advisement some of the comments in terms of highlighting our equity goals within the plan. I know we've got some specific reference, but to give that broader lens. And then also, to the extent you can enumerate in an effective way at the appropriate place within the document, other ways we can get other policy objectives met, and how we will be using those as part of the way we evaluate the best steps moving forward, just as a matter of advisement. And so we have before us a move to adopt the zero waste plan and then a staff direction that outlines next steps, timelines, and expectations. See no further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you for all the work. Item 25, Access Minneapolis Plan Assessments. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for your thoughtful comments on the zero waste plan. We've heard you, and we're looking forward to moving forward with it. Introducing next this Access Minneapolis Plan Assessments, and you may be wondering what this is. I'm not sure you've heard an item like this from us before. I want to stress the importance of self-assessment. We prepare a lot of plans in the city, and we are assessed regularly by our citizens and by those who are users of our transportation system or any of our public utilities. It's important that we self-assess when we are on the eve of an update to a major plan update. So on the heels of the comprehensive plan preparation, we are also looking forward to a new Access Minneapolis 10-year action plan. As we're doing that, it's important that we understand how we did on our first Access Minneapolis action plan, which was prepared 10 years ago. Staff has taken it upon themselves to prepare this assessment. This will be presented by Kathleen Mayel, who has done a good amount of the heavy lifting, but is really an effort of the Transportation Planning and Programming Division so that we understand how did we do and how can we do better. So I'll have Kathleen present the rest of this now.
Thank you.
Thank
Good morning.
you, Robin. Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Kathleen Mayel, Supervisor, Transportation Planner in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division of Public Works. And I'm happy to come forth with our work that is not only just a reflection of many of the staff in Transportation Planning and Programming Division here, but really we worked with all the transportation divisions in Public Works to ensure that we were thorough in capturing progress made to date. So I'll just quickly give an update, or I'm sorry, an overview of Access Minneapolis in its current form, why we conducted this assessment, expanding a little bit on what Robin said, components of each plan assessment, and then as we look ahead, how we plan to use this. So currently there are 6 components of Access Minneapolis, and they were adopted starting in 2007 with the Downtown Action Plan, followed by streetcar planning. In 2008, the design guidelines for streets and sidewalks. The citywide action plan was adopted in 2009, as well as the pedestrian master plan, and then the bike master plan in 2011, followed by the protected bikeway update in 2015. And so as these plans were set to guide us for 10 years, we're reaching the brink of their expected life, I'll say. So we wanted to look at these plans to evaluate what worked and what didn't, and why things didn't, and what could we take from those in terms of looking forward. So we documented the successes, the shortcomings, any shifting priorities, given what was said 10 or so years ago. And then we documented what 8 actions we have taken to date that were outlined in the original plans. And really the goal of this is to guide and serve as a base as we move forward with our Access Minneapolis plan update starting next year. We, as well as collaborating with our other transportation related divisions in Public Works, we also reached out to our different agency partners who have, partial responsibility for the implementation of some of these items. So our colleagues at Metro Transit and other agencies to make sure that we were capturing the full body of work that's been completed in Minneapolis over the past number of years. So each of these plan assessments, we did one on each of the 6 different plans, as well as an executive summary, trying to bring it all together. We documented what the major accomplishments were. A few examples of what those are through the different plans is from the Downtown Action Plan, the completion of Mark II. From the Citywide Action Plan, some major investments in transit, including 35W at 94, Bottineau Light Rail, Southwest Light Rail, progress on the A and C lines. Within the PED Master Plan, we've seen a lot of innovations in terms of pedestrian improvements, creation of a new sidewalk crosswalk marking policy, and the creation of proposed sidewalk capital programs. In terms of the Bike Master Plan and the Protected Bikeway update, we've seen a real proliferation of our bike network since the plan was adopted, and really using that plan to help guide those investments. Our Complete Streets policy has given some more definition and guidance to support the work, or the different guidance outlined in our design guidelines for streets and sidewalks. And then within our streetcar planning efforts, the creation of a value capture district to really advance the funding available for a potential streetcar line. We also wanted to take an honest reflection of what sort of shortcomings we saw in each of the different plans, and to varying degrees, having consistent measurable action items in each of the different plans components was something that could be improved upon, as well as more clearly articulating the responsibilities for different action items. In addition, the length of some of the documents, we could improve upon that next time in terms of making these a bit more concise and digestible for both our internal and external stakeholders to really grab the crux of the information. The action items, we did document the status of the different action items in each of the plan assessments. And then we also wanted to note different changes that have happened, both external to the city enterprise as well as internal, and how those have influenced the implementation of these plans. So some examples of notable external changes are really the changing land uses and new population that the city has developed over or experienced over the last 10 years, primarily in downtown, the North Loop, uptown, the U of M. We've seen an increase of over 25,000 residents since this first plan was adopted. There's been a real increase in focus on equity when it comes to transportation work. There's been a heightened awareness of pedestrian needs and safety. There's a lot of new national guidance that didn't exist when these plans were originally created, specifically the work done by the National Association of City Transportation Officials that really are urban at their core, and that's had a big impact. And then now there's a real focus on the future in terms of automation, electrification, shared mobility, and a lot of energy around those topics that are also changing. Some of the internal changes, we've adopted a commitment to Vision Zero. We've passed a robust complete streets policy. There's been the creation of both the funding and the plan documentation of the 20-year streets funding planning, and a real focus on racial and economic equity when it comes to transportation in terms of how we plan, program, construct, and design our streets. New pedestrian infrastructure practices and programs, and also internally the creation of the Transportation Planning and Programming Division within Public Works to help with some of this work. And then some of the notable implications and action items moving forward, takeaways after assessing these different plans. We saw a real need to emphasize data-driven approaches, identify clear benchmarks and assign responsibilities, fully incorporate these new policy overarching frameworks of complete streets, Vision Zero, emphasize that interagency coordination, approach transit more broadly throughout the city, and also base these plans on more of a brief and graphical display that is a little bit more consumable to the audience. So as Robin mentioned, we are looking to begin the update of Access Minneapolis next year, and we plan to use these assessments as a baseline for both our internal and external understanding of where we're at and where we've come over the last 10 years. So these are the covers of the 6 plan assessments in the executive summary. They're all online. They're all about 10 or so pages in length, and I hope they guide us, in the years plus to get us off, starting with our access update. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I just want to say thanks for doing this review of Access Minneapolis. It's kind of funny because when I was first elected, that's when the planning process itself had started, but then was finalized after I was elected starting in 2006. And it was like a really big deal. And I don't think that there had been any plan of this type before in the Public Works Department. So it was really taking on a very new piece of work. It was very challenging working. I mean, this is sort of, I think, also some of the first bigger attempts through Public Works of trying to understand how do you work with large stakeholder groups and try to figure out how to make your way and set a plan that's a future-oriented plan instead of just kind of reacting to immediate things that you need to do. So it was a really big deal. And I'm really glad that you kind of called this out by doing some evaluation, some recognition of the different plan pieces then that took their own life and got developed. And so it's going to be exciting as just a resident of the city to kind of see what you do moving forward with the next iteration. And clearly you're in a very different place now than staff was in the kind of the mid-2000s and trying to figure out how do we have the resources and the capacity to do the work that underlies a major body of a major plan like this. So anyway, congratulations to Public Works, and look forward to the next. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo those comments, but I also just want to highlight a couple things. First of all, I think this is such a great kind of step to take as we launch into the next phases of developing our new plans for transportation in the city. Councilmember Reich and I have been working closely with the mayor's office and staff on our comprehensive plan update. And, you know, so far, I don't know of a plan in the country that so centers race equity in a comprehensive plan as ours has so far, and I expect to as it is adopted next year. And I think weaving that into every aspect of the plan, including our transportation and public works systems, will be really important. And so I just wanted to highlight that piece. And especially as you talk about how our transportation system is interacting with the patterns of development that we're seeing in our city. And so far, we've seen so much development in just these few places, but another aspirational goal of our plan is to really start to increase housing options throughout our city instead of concentrating all of the development and housing options in so few area of our land area in the city. And that will bring about its own expanding needs for transportation access in neighborhoods throughout the city. And one thing I've so appreciated about hearing from our public works department over the time I've been in office is that I think our department has a good understanding of the fact that how we define the goals of public works delivery and our transportation systems delivery is really baked into access and equity. And so if we only define, for example, projects based on traffic volumes or pavement construction, we're never really reaching those goals. And that's what's so significant and groundbreaking about the work you've done, baking equity into our 20-year streets funding proposal. So I'm excited to see, I just wanted to highlight those things because we're doing some of the best work in the country in the city of Minneapolis on these issues. And I'm excited to see the ways that it kind of comes to life in this next phase of updating our plans. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I was involved as a citizen as the Access Minneapolis and Bicycle Master Plan and Pedestrian Master Plan were developed and adopted last time. And I think that there has been an increase in expectation around community engagement in that time. And I just wondered if you could comment briefly, either you or the director, about what the plan is to sort of revisit our system plans and really answer the call for more engagement that we're seeing. And I think there's a benefit to doing it on this plan level, because right now we're spending so much time and energy, and I know we all appreciate the staff time that's going into every project we do, but I think ideally this is an opportunity for us to do more of that system plan engagement so that hopefully every individual street won't take quite as many public meetings in all of your time. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Bender. Yes, I think that public engagement is going to be a key component to this. We really have spent, just as context, the last half a year to a year developing these plan assessments, digging in deep, making sure we understand where we're at in order to understand first the value of the plans and then again our footing as we move forward. So now, starting now, we're going to now turn our direction more forward. And not to say we haven't thought about community engagement broadly, but we don't have a specific plan in place yet, but certainly looking toward creative, engaging ways of connecting with people throughout all parts of our community. We know that people care deeply about transportation and the different elements thereof, be it walking, biking, transit, driving, people care, right? And so we want to really devise a plan and a strategy, and it's not just going to be one thing, but over the course of however long this update takes us to make sure that people feel heard and people feel like they have options of voicing their opinion and see that they have been heard and that their voice is articulated, in some capacity. So I don't have a concrete answer at the moment, but it's certainly something we're aware of and excited to continue to try out new things and new ways of connecting with people throughout the city.
I think that's great. And I know we have the basis of all the work that's happened with CPED and the NCR folks who've been involved in the comp plan. So I think there's that good base to build on. And just another piece of that, I think that, again, this baseline work that you're doing and the data will help with the community engagement, because part of, I think, what will happen is you're helping share a story with the public about where our city is going and the data that we've seen and the information that you have about our neighborhoods and how people are getting around. I think that will also be an important component of that conversation with the community. So again, just underscoring the value of the work that has happened. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, I'll just say that, much appreciated time to do something like this. It's very, I don't know if this is a real word, but plannerly. It's just taking that critical look with an eye to saying what we build off of and how we evolve, but also how do we strategically see the changes and challenges and opportunities before us and take that step back before we move forward. And so I think we're in that moment. It times up very nicely. It was a really good catch time-wise in terms of the comp work that Councilmember Bender had just mentioned, to say that as we move to our piece of that, as we're simultaneously deriving in a very central way the land use policy moving forward, which of course our comp plan is going to be way beyond land use at this point in time, and to have that central place that the department's taking upon itself and council leadership in terms of making sure that these aren't silos. We are having a comprehensive plan that's truly comprehensive. Transportation, how we move, how we operate, how we function is going to be right in the heart of that. And then in terms of when it's go time, when we do get back to our plan sets and what we do implement, we have our own document to do that implementation work. But the framework is completely baked into the comp plan, and we have kind of that dual thing, frameworks and action. And that, I think, is going to be the signature of the department moving forward. So, and this was a key critical, could not have pivoted that way without this step. So this work is very critical. So thank you for it. With that, I will receive and file the presentation of the sixth plan assessment of the City of Minneapolis Access Minneapolis 10-year Transportation Action Plan as described in the staff presentation. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Final item, 26, the City of Minneapolis Pedestrian Crash Study. Director.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Public Works has been working on this pedestrian crash study for about a year. We are first and foremost an organization that is data-driven. And as much as we are adapting to changing expectations about community engagement and the kinds of conversations that we have and the amount of conversations that we have, we are also spending more time using data to inform our decisions. I want to thank you again for your leadership on making a strong statement and commitment to Vision Zero. At its heart, it is built on good data. And what we lacked was the essential information about pedestrian crashes in order to begin our efforts on Vision Zero. We plan to work very intently and intensely with our community-based organizations and those around us that we know care deeply about safety on our streets. And we will be hopefully beginning that work quickly in 2018. In the meantime, we are increasing our understanding of where we have problems, and especially related to pedestrian crashes. So today, the culmination of a lot of work on the part of Steve Mosing and his team and John Werchis in the traffic division and assisted by Kelsey Fote from Transportation Planning and Programming. We're happy to present the results of the pedestrian crash study.
Good morning.
This is Kelsey Fote.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kelsey Fote. I'm an Associate Transportation Planner with the Transportation Planning and Program Division of Public Works. I'm here today to introduce the pedestrian crash study. I'll give a short introduction, then hand it over to Steve to dive a little bit more into the findings of that study. The pedestrian crash study is essentially a look back at a 10-year period of crashes involving pedestrians in Minneapolis. It's a culmination of several plans, policies, and initiatives that have led to this endeavor and that highlight walking, including the pedestrian master plan, the complete streets policy, and recently the commitment to Vision Zero. It acknowledges that we are all pedestrians at some point in our day, and pedestrians are among the most vulnerable users on our system. It gives us a better understanding. It seeks to give us a better understanding of where crashes are occurring, provide some more context, and identify trends for the contributing factors surrounding these crashes. It gives us a very broad view, and the findings will be invaluable, as Robin said, moving forward in our planning and our design work. Going from here. With that, I'll hand it over to Steve.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Steve Mosing, Traffic Operations Engineer for Public Works. So what I'll first do before we get into the data from the study is I'll just talk a little bit about the national trends and then the state trends. So nationally, pedestrian crashes are on the rise. We hit this low point in 2009, but since then they've been rising, and between 2010 and 2015, about a 25% increase nationally in pedestrian crashes. The biggest contributing factor is driver inattention and failure to yield. And to kind of get a gauge on that with regard to the city of Minneapolis and other cities, in Chicago, about 48% of the crashes were associated with driver inattentiveness and drivers failing to yield. New York, 36%, and Minnesota, 38%, the state as a whole. And in the city of Minneapolis, 42%. So a little bit about the state trends. State trends, again, those are increasing both from a pedestrian standpoint and an overall all mode type crash respect. So those are also going up. What you see, it's kind of a busy graph, but what you see on the green dashed line is the number of pedestrian crashes in the state of Minnesota. What you see, the solid blue line, is number of all crashes in the city of Minneapolis. That would include also freeway crashes that occur in the city. What you see at the bottom is pedestrian crashes in Minneapolis. So the point of this graph is when you see statewide pedestrian crashes go up, crashes in the city go up. The pedestrian crashes in the city are staying relatively stable, not seeming to follow the trend that the other types of crashes that are occurring, and also with the pedestrian crashes within the state. So a little bit about the study now. Throughout the presentation, you'll see a lot of references to the 10-year data set and to the 3-year data set. So the 3-year data set is, we took approximately 880 crash reports. That's the paper reports that you receive from the authorities with regard to what happened during the crash. And from that report, we can get a lot of information, and the location of the pedestrian when the crash occurred, the pre-existing maneuvers of vehicles. We can get a lot more detailed information. So we took 3 years of data from those actual physical paper copy of police reports. But we also have a 10-year data set, and the 10-year data set, not as detailed, but it gives us an idea on trends within, from an historic standpoint. And also the 10-year data set includes all authorities that respond to crashes in the city of Minneapolis, just not Minneapolis Police. So it would be State Patrol, University of Minnesota Police, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Transit Police, all those. That is contained within the 10-year crash report or 10-year data set. So we're getting in the most data we've had in some time with regard to evaluating crashes. What we did attempt to do as part of the study was look at crashes that aren't reported, and it's going to continue to be a challenge to do that. But what we did do is get the hospital records and match those against the crashes that were reported and the hospital records where a crash was reported. And there is a gap, and that's contained in more detail in the report. So how we correlated the data, and again, we have the 3-year data set and the 10-year data set, and you'll see those sourced throughout the presentation, is we took this data set and correlated that against street information like sidewalks, vehicle lanes, speed limits, and bicycle lanes. But we also put on top of that crosswalks, stop signs, and signals. And this is not all the stuff we correlated the traffic crash or pedestrian crashes against, but it's most of it. So kind of an infrastructure piece, a laning piece. And then they also took in other pieces of information such as transit routes, walking routes, and then demographics. So compiling all this information, and then if you see at the bottom, you can see this is the 10-year data set. Approximately 80% of all pedestrian crashes occur on 10% of roadways within the city. And about 75% of all major crashes, and when I say major, I mean fatality and incapacitating injury crashes, occur on 5% of the streets. So a few of the key findings, and there's a lot of findings within the report. These are just ones that I pulled out to show, but there's it's a 99-page report. It has a lot of information in it. Is streets with fewer lanes do have fewer pedestrian crashes. So if you look at the graph on the left, you look at the difference between a 1-lane, 2-lane, and 3-lane one-way street, you can see as you go up in lanes, you also go up in crashes. And the same applies to a 2-way street. 2 lanes to 4 lanes, you do increase in crashes per mile. Also, with regard to vehicle speeds, and this matches national trends as well, the lower speed you got, the lower percentage of severe crashes you have. So if you look at the 25 mile an hour or less, 6%, and you kind of stare up, 30 miles it gets a little higher, 35 gets a little higher, 40 to 50 it gets a little higher. We just don't have a lot of roadways with 55 mile an hour speed limits that we manage. I know the freeway system has 55 mile an hour, but that's not part of the pedestrian crash study that we did. So it's the data's kind of skewed there, but for the most part, as you increase in speed, you increase in your severity of crashes in the city. So most crashes happen at intersections. 85% of crashes happen at intersections, and that's all intersections. There's 7,500 or so in the city, and then the other remaining 15% happen at the mid-block areas of the street system. Again, this is the 10-year data set. Of those intersections where crashes are happening, 68% of those are at signalized intersections. So now we get into the 3-year data set. This is the data set that we looked more intently at, looked at locations, where things were located, pedestrian was located, the vehicle was located, pre-crash maneuvers, things like that. At the signalized intersections, 84% of the time, pedestrian was in the crosswalk. At unsignalized intersection, the pedestrian's in the crosswalk 55% of the time. You have a couple percentages that are outside the intersection itself, and then there is a small percentage where it was just based on the police report. We couldn't tell where in the intersection the crash occurred. So of the crashes, pedestrian crashes, turning vehicles are the largest group. So they account for about 50% of crashes in the city. Of those, 75% are left turning vehicles. So again, 50% of crashes, pedestrian crashes, are a result of a turning vehicle, and 75% of those are a result of a left turning vehicle. So a couple other key findings is, I thought it was interesting with regard to the no turn on red. There's about 20% of our signalized intersections have no turn on red signs installed, but that has not percentage-wise reduced the number of turn on red crashes. Also, it hasn't overall reduced pedestrian crashes when you compare the intersections with no turn on red and the ones without a no turn on red. So no turn on red intersections account for about 20% of the city's signal system, but 29% of all the PED crashes occur at intersections that have no turn on red installed. So if you go to, in that data set, it comes from the 10-year data set. If you go to the pre-crash maneuver, which is on the bottom of the screen, that's a 3-year data set that we looked at. There's many of these. I just took out the top 3. So you got, as far as a vehicle maneuver, and this is what the vehicle is doing prior to the crash actually happening. So vehicle following the roadway is the most for a vehicle pre-maneuver, vehicle making a left turn, a close second, and then a vehicle making a right turn is within our top 3. But then again, there's a whole list of this. These are just the top 3. Interesting with the pre-crash maneuver for pedestrians. So this is something the pedestrian is doing prior to the crash. Pedestrian crossing with the traffic signal. So that's the number 1 by far. pedestrians crossing or darting out into traffic, pedestrians crossing without signal or crosswalk. So these are the pre-crash maneuvers of vehicles on the top graph and then pedestrians on the bottom graph. So using the 3-year data set, we looked at, and not all crash reports signify fault. It's not contained in crash reports much at all. So we have to take those crash reports, analyze them, and make a determination as to who's at fault. And in some cases, actually both a pedestrian and the motor vehicle are at fault. The motor vehicle driver are at fault. Some cases we just can't tell. But in most cases, the motor vehicle driver is at fault 62% of the time. So some other key findings that we're going to continue to monitor. This is more associated with stuff that we've done recently in the city. Leading pedestrian interval, LPI. We've got some mixed results with early crash data coming in. So we have 0.5% of our signal system have leading pedestrian interval, but they make up 3% of our pedestrian crashes. And there's a lot of things that can be said about that. These intersections that we have is at just have a lot of pedestrians there. But we'll dig a little deeper into the data and keep watching that data. I think with regard to the LPI and looking at the data and the more detailed data is in the report, some intersections you can tell it's working well. Some intersections it's kind of fluctuating and kind of inconclusive as to whether or not it's working. And one intersection that where it is working is Hennepin and Lake. You can see an obvious reduction in pedestrian crashes after we installed the LPI at that intersection. So flashing yellow arrows, that's something you see mostly outside the city with regard to signal operations, and that's hopefully everyone's aware of it. It's when the yellow arrow flashes to allow for a permissive left turn at a signalized intersection. We got a handful of complaints from the public with regard to this operation and how it impacts PEDs. So we took a little bit of a deeper look at it. And again, it's something that you can't really draw a conclusion on because there's not a lot of data, but something we will continue to monitor. Because these flashing yellow arrow systems make up 0.5% of our signal system, but they account for 1% of our pedestrian crashes. And then finally, something we're going to watch further, and the illustration on the right shows our existing parallel zebra crosswalk system prior to transforming those all 3,700 crosswalks to zebra crosswalks this year. So I would say that the graph on the right, maybe not enough data to draw a conclusion, but we'll be looking at how the system operates with our new crosswalks because all of them have been changed. So a fairly simple data set, and they were changed this year, and to see how pedestrian crashes result from these types of crosswalk markings. So we'll continue to monitor that as well.
We have a question on this slide, Councilmember Jordan.
I'm just sorry if I missed this, but you talked about the leading pedestrian interval, and the other option is it's called lagging. Is that right? Or so this means when the light goes first for the pedestrians before traffic.
Correct, members of the committee. Councilmember Gordon. Yeah, I apologize. The leading pedestrian interval is when all the signal directions for motor vehicles are red and the pedestrian phase comes up on its own.
And how does that compare when the pedestrian phase comes up later? Are there some of those intersections as well? And are the accidents greater or not?
There are a number of those intersections out there. I would say that what the data compared is the before and after of the, both the before and after, but also in correlation with the other intersections in the city. And the before after is somewhat inconclusive. I think we've implemented an LPI, leading pedestrian interval, at about 15 intersections. And, there are a couple intersections, Hennepin and Lake, where we see, I'll say, positive results with reduction in pedestrian crashes since we installed the LPI. We have 4th and 15th Southeast, 4th Street Southeast and 15th Avenue Southeast, where we saw a reduction in pedestrian crashes after we installed the LPI. But there's other intersections that we installed the LPI where we actually have fluctuating and some even increased. So I think it's a matter of addressing the problem at the intersection that pertains to the pedestrian crash type at Hennepin Lake, left turn pedestrian crashes, 4th and 15th turning crashes. So I think the LPI addressed those specifically. That's what nationally the LPI has been proven to do. But other intersections, it's just fluctuated where you can't really draw a conclusion. Hopefully that answered your question.
It did. Of course, I wanted one to be much safer than the other, so we could just do one everywhere, but I guess we have to be more thoughtful.
And so with that, that concludes the presentation.
Councilmember Palmisano. Nope. Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks. Well, and I apologize. I don't know how much longer we're going here. If I have to walk out before the full end of the meeting, but this was an absolutely fascinating report. I haven't made my way through the whole actual report, but I intend to take a look. It'd be curious. You don't need to say this now, but some of this information just in your summary was surprising to me as a kind of non-engineering professional. You know, that this majority of the so I don't know if it was surprising to you or not, but this majority of crashes happening where we actually have some control of traffic, right, at intersections and with traffic signals. So that was very interesting to me. I don't know. Yeah, so anyway, I'll be very curious to see kind of how we develop what are the actual recommendations then for how to address this, because these are already places where there has been some investment, and clearly that investment is not protecting the pedestrian. So anyway, I find that absolutely critical, and I don't know if kind of what you're finding through the study that you directed here in Minneapolis matches up to other studies happening around the country, or kind of how on the kind of leading the edge of this important work that we are. Someone had just sent to me actually one of the maps in your report that, again, I haven't made my way fully through the report yet, that shows more of the actual locations of the high, where you have kind of higher percentages of pedestrian crashes, which seem to match up with racially concentrated areas of poverty. And so, you know, anyway, I think that's also just very important information to pull out and look at, also as this overlaps with our 20-year capital investment plan. So this kind of goes to the importance of kind of continuing to really dig in and relook at kind of how and why are we making investments, and are we doing those investments in a way that does sort of our most important job, which is safety, right? I mean, usually as a city, you kind of say safety always takes preeminence, right? Almost, you know, virtually everything. So anyway, I think that's important to kind of get further feedback from staff, and also, you know, so how this report, what are those key additional learnings beyond the ones that were, again, absolutely critical, fascinating information that you shared here. But it seems like there's even more in this very deep report. And also, how does this overlap with ways we've already made a commitment to invest in the city in important ways? And so how does this help direct our investment?
Any further questions or commentary? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was struck, I guess I knew this, but the statistics about how few of our streets have the vast majority of our crashes, I think, is very compelling. And, you know, I was thinking about this during the previous presentation. We've succeeded in this city of using reconstruction and resurfacing projects as opportunities to improve safety, and that there's so many benefits to that we've brought forward of using our public dollars efficiently and making sure that when we touch a street, we're making it better for all users. But I think the next phase of our work, especially around pedestrian safety with our commitment to Vision Zero, is figuring out how we do the other side of that investment, which is the more proactive, particularly around pedestrian safety, targeted intersections or corridors where we're seeing high crash rates. And I think part of our challenge is a lot of these seem to be county roads. So there's a multi-jurisdictional approach that we need to work with our partners at the county. So I just wanted to observe that, a number of them are in my ward, and they're the major arterials. Sometimes we put a safety improvement down that, so these bike lanes on 26th and 28th Street, staff will remember that the impetus of that project was really a pedestrian safety, call for pedestrian safety improvements much farther east than my ward. And so those corridors were improved with a bicycle lane as partly a traffic calming and pedestrian safety improvement that spanned the whole city on one of our highest crash corridors. But, explaining that to constituents that see a bike lane out there is, it's a little bit challenging sometimes when they just see that infrastructure improvement. So I think kind of lifting up these major corridors where we're seeing such intensity of crashes, as Councilmember Glidden noted, a lot of them I did see too were also in the racially concentrated areas of poverty, and not always in the most populated and dense parts of our city. The ones in my ward, of course, are, but in North Minneapolis, we have pretty high crash rates considering the lower density of population there. So it's exciting to think about the ways that all of our policy commitments and this huge investment commitment that we've made give us the opportunity to be more proactive in taking all the data you've found here and really starting to target those solutions on these high crash corridors. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Gordon.
I really appreciate the report and analysis. I think this is really helpful, and also seeing that some intersections got looked at really carefully and some of the corridors did. I actually had to print the whole thing out because it's just too hard to try to look at it online and go back and forth. And I know it's a lot of pages, but it's a great read. Take it home. Recommend it. I think residents may really want to look at this and study it further too. I was curious about some of the information, like about some of the corridors, maybe Franklin Avenue. I was trying to recall, did we do lane reductions there? Did we see any improvements when we did that? We hear a lot about the double threat, triple threat, and all of this, and are so many turning lanes even causing problems. So, I'm curious if you noticed any differences with any of the changes that we made over the 10-year period with the crashes. It sort of looked like we didn't, because it looked like there was an uptick more recently on a lot of these, but I think that might give us more of a foundation for future changes if we said, oh, we did. And Cedar is another one that is, and 27th and Cedar is a bad intersection. That surprised me. It's not a lot of traffic typically on 27th. Cedar must be. And so, but did you notice any trends in terms of over the 10 years where a corridor got fewer accidents because of maybe some design changes that were made?
Members of the committee, Councilmember Gordon, I'll say that first, with regard to the report, the 10-year data span is probably your most valued look at a corridor such as Franklin, and we have all this data, in a database now with a GIS backdrop that we can throw and make, not just the queries that you already see in the report, but many other queries that we can think of along the way. So to get to your question with regard to Franklin or maybe any other street, sometimes when a street's improved in that 10-year data set, it doesn't account for the improvement piece, because also before it was improved, that data is also in that data set. And so it would be having to find that date where the street was improved and look at it from that end of things and take out the data from, well, not take it out, but separate the data from when it wasn't improved. The only thing I can say is from an observation standpoint, and without the data in front of me, is the piece of Franklin from the river to approximately Chicago. I don't seem to get as many calls on that stretch of roadway, since the segment between Chicago and Bloomington was improved some time ago. I think, maybe even 15 years ago, and then the other section went down to a 1 lane. So I can only answer it that way, but without the true data there to represent it, I would say that it's likely, but we'd have to look at the data.
Well, and maybe that's a good thing that we can look at in the future and do more analysis, which is my last point, is just how valuable this is going to be as we are moving forward with our Vision Zero idea. I think it's really timely. I actually think this study motivated us, I think, to make that resolution and to take that step, because we realized we're going to have some really good information to build off of now, and I think that we will. And this is really going to be helpful moving forward. So appreciate that, and maybe we can keep, as the years roll by, keep putting the data in there, and we'll keep having this to go back to and to understand and make good decisions. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Yeah, I agree. This is great for our broader policies like Vision Zero, but as mentioned, it's just there for any specific sort of project or intersection or constituent concern. We can now draw upon that data sets, bring it up and bring it to bear on any conversation, particularly with our constituencies. As Councilmember Bender, what might not be apparent based on, for lack of a better term, sort of folk intuition about what an intersection or street might need design-wise, we have some data now to infuse in that conversation. And I think that this will just be the gift that will keep on giving for all those specific project-based conversations, in addition to how it tees up our more ambitious, larger policy framework with Vision Zero. And, for what would normally be a sort of dry data subject matter, you got raving reviews of this for a book review panel. It's hard copy worthy. I think Councilmember Glidden said it was fascinating. So I think well done. And thank you. With that, I will move the City of Minneapolis pedestrian crash study, receiving and filing that document as presented. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we have dispensed with today's agenda and thereby adjourned. Thank you.